Coming. Just kidding. No. So I am saving my best present in case I have a bug in my 10 lines of code. It's a cool geek t-shirt right from the Microsoft store. But that's for if I have a bug and someone fixes it for me and I'm typing. So I can't give that away. We good to start back there? 1 minute. I'm from Seattle. Anyone else from Seattle around here? Awesome. 2, 3. If you work for Microsoft, doesn't count. That's line 2. That's line 2 of my intro. So I'm from the Visual Studio team, though. Yeah, not the SharePoint platform team, but we work real close. We do the tools, they do the platform. That's not going to make you leave, though, is it? All right. I got contacts on that team, so I can hook you up. Oh, yeah? Excellent. We probably know some of the same people, huh? All right, so my timer's running. So welcome. Welcome to the last day of Tech Ed. Hopefully everyone's had a great time, learned a lot of great stuff. My name is Mike Morton, and as I told you, I'm from Seattle there. I work at Microsoft. I'm part of the Visual Studio group, and we created the SharePoint developer tools that ship as part of VS 2010. So today, I want to give you an overview of those tools, show you how they interact with TFS and Visual Studio Ultimate, and just demonstrate how Visual Studio 2010 really provides a first-class experience for the SharePoint developer. So let's just go right ahead and jump into a few slides, and then we'll jump over to some demos. We'll kind of go back and forth so we can keep this interesting. So the developer tools, when we started to create this new set of developer tools, we had kind of 4 main things that we wanted to do. We really wanted to provide a familiar VS experience to you VS developers that were now coming in to do SharePoint development. We wanted to have great integration with TFS and some of the ALM features, such as IntelliTrace and unit testing and some of those things. Obviously, the source code control that's part of TFS, and just the overall application lifecycle management. We also wanted to provide a real broad support for SharePoint, for the SharePoint platform. Things like the new sandbox solutions that you can create and the BCS services that allow you to get external data that's maybe out on your line of business databases and bring that into SharePoint. And then lastly, we wanted to provide a development continuum so that if you were maybe using SharePoint Designer or you had users that were using SharePoint Designer, you could bring some of those artifacts into Visual Studio and then get them under source code control and continue building on a solution that maybe you started in the SharePoint Designer or someone else did. Those were kind of our 4 big things that we wanted to provide, and I think we've done a real good job with that. So let's actually touch on that last one first. I don't have a demo around that, so we'll just knock it out of here and get it out of the way. It is a really helpful thing, though. Primarily, it starts kind of in the middle with SharePoint Designer. That's where you get the most bang for the buck for this feature, because there's a lot of artifacts you can create in SharePoint Designer, lists and libraries and forms and such. And that bottom one, I apologize, last-minute slide bug, that should be declarative workflows in yellow there, not coded workflows, because those are the type of workflows that you can create in SharePoint Designer. So if I jump over to the left, it actually can start with Visio. Visio actually allows folks that are familiar with Visio to sketch out workflows and drag shapes onto the designer and build out the skeleton of a workflow that can then be imported into SharePoint Designer and turned into an actual SharePoint workflow. I don't know if anyone's done that, but it's a pretty handy thing that you can do. From that point, you can actually export it back out to Visio and kind of round trip between Visio and SharePoint Designer as you need. And then when the time is right, or for some other artifacts that maybe you've created in SharePoint Designer, you can actually export those out. And you export those out to what's called a WSP. In fact, this is probably a good time, before we get any farther, how many folks are actually doing SharePoint development today? Can we get a show of hand real quick? So not a ton, but maybe, I don't know, maybe 30, 40%. Of those, how many of you are actually using the SharePoint tools in Visual Studio 2010? So just a few. So this is probably a really good session for you, so we'll give you an overview of those tools. Are you using something else other than those tools, maybe WSP Builder or VSE WSS to do your development? Okay, a couple of those, very few. And then maybe some folks maybe are just using SharePoint Designer. Is that true? Last question, I promise. All right, so just a few of those too. So for those of you that maybe are using SharePoint Designer, or you have a power user or an IW user come to you and say, hey, we started this solution in SharePoint Designer, and now we want to have you extend it and actually make it a real solution that's maybe IT managed or something. We hear that a lot. So that's where you would use the SharePoint Designer, export your entire site out to a WSP. The WSP is kind of the currency of a SharePoint solution. Whether it's a solution or a site, WSP is the packaging format that SharePoint uses. You can take that WSP and then import it into Visual Studio, and then you can get those artifacts, whether they're lists or list definitions or other types of artifacts there. Get those under source code control, make them part of a bigger solution, and then have kind of a much more repeatable process to be able to maybe do unit testing and so on and so forth. So we wanted to make sure of that development continuum. We feel that's real important. Let's touch real quick on the developer environment. So for Visual Studio 2010 to do SharePoint development, you need VS 2010 Pro or above, so you need to at least have Pro on your development machine. You also need SharePoint 2010 on that same machine. It could be Foundation or Server. If you're 2007 users, that's WSS or MOS, right? It is meant for SharePoint 2010 development. We do have a couple of project templates, so if you are on SharePoint 2007, you can use the tools to do workflow development only, and I'll show you those project templates when we switch over. But primarily what I'm going to show you, in fact, exclusively what I'm going to show you today, is the SharePoint 2010 development and the tools that allow you to use that. For your development server, that can actually be Windows 7 or Vista SP1. It doesn't have to be server, but that's for development only. If you're doing actual production work, of course, SharePoint has to be installed on Windows Server 2008 or 2008 R2. All of those require 64-bit, whether it's the desktop or the server. SharePoint 2010 only works on the 64-bit version. There's a couple of links here. These links weren't real pretty, so throughout the deck, I put kind of the pretty link, and then you can download the deck, and it has the links behind, of course. And I have a number of links for resources at the end, so you'll want to download the deck and get those. Here's a couple of places. The first link was the original kind of instructions for how to set up that developer environment. It kind of walked you through the manual steps. But just recently, the second link, the SharePoint Easy Setup, that's where you'll want to go first, because it's a set of scripts that really make it almost point and click, but much easier to configure a developer box, including if you want to build out a VM. I'm going to mostly hold questions for the end, but if it's a quick one here, this is kind of important. So I would say 4 if you're running a Foundation. You can get away with 4 meg on your machine. We test with less, but if you want it to work fairly well, I'd say 4. If you're doing server, I'd recommend 6, although I've run that on 4 also. Turn some of those services off if you don't need everything. If you're not doing something that requires search or this or that, turn some of those services off and bring that memory and CPU usage down. That's a totally good idea. All right, so that's how you set up your environment. So now let's jump in and start talking about the tools. As I mentioned, we wanted to create a lot of support, broad support for SharePoint. So we created a number of project and item templates to support the most common SharePoint projects and their artifacts, such as workflows and list definitions and the BCS external content types and things like that. We have wizards that help collect some of that information to make that easier. And then, of course, we have a number of designers for designing visual web parts, which is like one of the most common thing that you'll build as you start in your SharePoint development. And we'll actually build one here in just a minute. We also have a designer if you want to build out your workflows. We have a drag and drop designer where you can drag activities onto the designer and then configure and write code behind those activities, as well as what's called a BDC designer. The BDC designer is, again, for bringing that external data from your external databases into SharePoint. You create a BDC model using our designer, And what it creates is external content types. Each entity on the designer is a content type. And then you can point that at your databases and then create external lists right inside of SharePoint. And your users don't know that that data maybe is coming from SAP or some other line of business system. I'll show you some of these templates and designers right now because I think it's a lot more fun just to go in and see what it looks like. And we'll build out a workflow. A visual web part, because that's one of the most common things that we see built is a visual web part. So here we are, Visual Studio 2010, and we'll just go ahead and start a new project. And here you'll see those 2 project templates that I talked about. Those are for 2007. Those are workflow only. But you'll notice in 2010, we added quite a bit more support. You can start with any one of these project templates you want. I commonly start with the empty project template and then add whatever items I want to the project. There's a couple of exceptions, and that's down here on those imports. This is around that developer continuum I talked about. These templates here are what you would use to import a WSP, and then you'll get a picker, and you can pick and choose what artifacts you want, what lists or list definitions or modules, and we'll import those into SharePoint for you, or into Visual Studio. Today we're going to go ahead and start with an empty project. And what I need to give it here on this first wizard is the URL of a site that I want to do my development against. When I start developing, I usually go and I create a new site collection for me to do development against for a project. I feel that's a good way to start. So here I'm just pointing at a site collection that I created, and I can choose Sandbox or Farm, which are the 2 types of packages you can create. They have some different trust levels and such. I don't want to go into too much detail on that right here. Afterwards, we can talk more if you have additional questions about Sandbox versus Farm. I'll give you guidance whenever possible. Go the Sandbox route, because as you potentially move into the cloud or Office 365, Sandbox solutions are the only things that will be or that are supported. So we'll go ahead and use a Sandbox solution here. And you'll see we have our empty project created there. We'll just immediately go and add a new item. And here we're going to grab the visual web part. We're going to grab the Sandbox version. You'll see there's actually 2 there. In the tools initially, the visual web part we shipped did not support the Sandbox. Since then, we've released a Power Tools, and I have a link to those Power Tools later. If you install those, you'll get this second visual web part that is supported in the Sandbox environment. And that's really handy because you get the visual portion of the web part. You don't have to do it all through code. We'll just go ahead and add one of those. We'll keep that default name. It's very creative, Visual Web Part 1. We'll switch over to the designer. It is a visual web part, so we might as well use that. And then let's just go ahead and build a real simple web part. So what I'm going to build here is a task adder, just a small little web part to make it easier and quicker to add tasks. I'm kind of a task-oriented person, so I want to be able to do that real quick and easy. So we'll just build this out with a label. And I'm going to actually take my properties here and pin those there. So I have more screen real estate. So we'll set that label. We'll set that to task description. And then we will grab a text box. We'll put that text box there, and we'll grab another label. So the only 2 things that we'll capture is task description and a due date. Those are kind of the 2 most important things, I feel. So we'll do due date. And rather than type in a date, we'll use the calendar control. So if you're a ASP.NET developer, this should look real familiar. I'm just dragging and dropping controls onto my page here and setting the properties as I would expect. Last thing we need is a button. So when I want to actually add the task, we'll just add a button here. We'll give it a quick label, something like add task maybe. Okay, let's go with that. And the last control we'll use is we'll just put one more label on here. And with that label, it's kind of going to be our feedback label. So when the task is added, we'll put up a little message. And let's just set the font, just so you can see I can use all of these properties as normal. Set that to small. All right. So we've quickly and pretty easily designed our visual web part. So now we're ready to write a little code. And I did promise you to keep it under around 10 lines, so there's not a lot here. We'll double-click on the button, and as you would expect, we'll get the event hooked up, and we're ready to go ahead and write our code. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add an item to the task. So the reason I want to show you this code is it'll introduce you to 6 or 7 of the most common SharePoint objects in the SharePoint API. The SharePoint API is pretty immense. There's a few that you'll find yourself using a lot, and you'll see some of those right here. Such as, what we need is we actually need an SP list item. That's the object we're going to create, and we're going to call that task item. And we'll set that to basically a new task item. And the way we'll do that is we'll start with the SP context, and you'll find that you do that a lot. And this is basically giving you the context of the SharePoint site or web that your web part is running in. So we'll do SP context, current, and then we can either go and get the site or the web. And if you're familiar with SharePoint, you know that SharePoint has a farm construct, and then it's kind of hierarchical. Underneath the farm, we have this thing called a web app, but we'll kind of skip that. Then you have a site collection, which contains one or more sites, and then you have sites or webs underneath the site collection. You have those, and those can be nested also. So we're going to get the current web that this web part is running in. And then there's a handy little object called lists off of the web. And this is just a collection of all the lists that are in this web. So once we have the collection, we'll actually look for the task list because we're adding a task. So we'll just go ahead and name that list, tasks. That's going to give us a reference to the task list. And then in the task list, there's another handy item called items. And probably can guess that's going to return all of the items, the collection of items in that list. And then finally, we'll do our add method, which is going to add a new item. It's not going to add it actually right then, but it's going to give us that object that we need. So now that we have an object that represents a new task, we can go ahead and set a couple properties. We'll turn caps lock off. We will set the title property. We'll set that to our description that we have, and that's up in text box 1, I believe. We'll just grab the text out of there. I have a bad habit or a good habit of doing a two-string on everything. We'll also set the due date. If you remember, we had the calendar control, so we'll do that. And that is the due date field. So these things in quotes here, those are the fields within that list. So it's the task list. And I know that there's a title and a due date, and there's a number of other fields that I could reference. And I'm just referencing those with the string there. And I will set that to the calendar control that we have. And that would be selected date, right? Yes. And we'll make that look a little better, like a short date string. Perfect. All right, so we've created our new task item. We've set our two properties, or two fields, the title and the due date. And now all we need to do is do task item.update. And this is what's going to actually insert that task into the SharePoint list. We'll have to finish that off like such. If I do make a typo and someone sees it, feel free to holler. I got that shirt up there for y'all. So now that we've added the task, let's just do a little bit of cleanup. We have that label, that third label that we added, and we'll just put in a little response saying task has been added. All right. And lastly, we will clear out that first text box and just set its text equal to nothing. All right, there we go. What do I have? I have 6 lines, so I have 4 lines of code that I'm allowed to write later. Parentheses don't count, I hope. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a breakpoint, and then I'm just going to press F5. If you've done SharePoint development previously, you're probably wondering, where's all the XML for the feature XML, the package XML? What about creating the cab file, blah, 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 blah. Well, all that happens, but we're going to take care of all that for you. So when I pressed F5 there, you can see in the bottom left, it actually happened a little too quick. We went ahead and built the assembly. We packaged it up with the feature XML and the package XML, put it into the cab file. We've already deployed it. We've already activated it. We've hooked up the debugger, and we've launched the browser. That all happened in about 3 seconds when you hit F5. So let's go over. And yeah, you are welcome to clap at any time. So I think someone was about to start clapping, so feel free to just jump on that, because that is pretty cool. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to my test page, which is currently empty. If you haven't seen Visual Studio 2010, how many folks are still using 2007 only? Okay, so if you haven't seen 2010, you'll see we have our ribbon up here. In fact, I could just click right there, and you can see that that's got a little shortcut for edit. But what I'll do is I'll actually just click on the page, and you'll see that here's the ribbon. This is the new ribbon. Looks kind of like the Office client ribbon. It's a contextual thing that helps you navigate through the many options. So that's kind of cool. What we're going to do is we're going to edit our page. Because we've already deployed that web part, all we need to do now is put it on a page so we can test it. And to do that, we can just insert that right here, and you'll see from our web part picker, there's our aptly named Visual Web Part 1. Oops, should have gave that a better title. We'll go ahead and click Add. That's going to take the web part and add it onto that page. There we go. And now we'll go to the page, and we'll go ahead and save and close that page. And there we have our web part. We created it, we've added it, we put it on a page. Let's do a quick test. It's been a busy week, so go on vacation is probably a task that I should do when I get back. We'll start that a little later this month. I'll click Add here, and our breakpoint is hit. So when we hit F5, our tool's hooked up to the appropriate process. Because it's running in the sandbox, it's actually not the W3WP process, which is the normal ASP.NET process. There's another sandbox process, but we take care of all that for you. You don't have to know which process to hook up for. We can F10 through our stuff as you would expect. We can see, all the stuff you would normally think of, call stacks and local variables and so on and so forth. Use all the power of the Visual Studio Debugger. So let's just go ahead and press F5 here. We'll let it continue. At that point, our task has been added, and you can see there we've got our nice little feedback that we added. And we can go to the task list. Let's just make that a little bigger. There we go. I like that better. And you'll see that we have our task go on vacation. I'm going to go ahead and delete that so it doesn't get in our way. And in fact, so that's how easy it was to go ahead and build a visual web part, to deploy it, to put it on the page, and test it. We did all of that in about less than 10 minutes. If you've done development before, you'll know that was quite a bit easier than previously. So it was kind of actually too easy to delete the task. We went through a lot of work to create the task. So I want to show you one other artifact real quick. Yes, sir, quick question? No, so our tools, the tools other than the workflow, 2010 only. Yes, sir. What I'm going to do is we're going to create an event receiver. That's another really common SharePoint artifact that folks use. Event receivers are used to run custom code when one of many events are fired off of a list or off of a site. And so what we'll do here is before we allow the deletion of a task, we'll make sure that the status has been set to completed. But that could be any kind of business logic you want. And when I bring up this, let me take the breakpoint off there, and we'll go here and we'll add a new item. So we'll add a new item here. We'll pick event receiver. We'll leave it with that really custom name again. And you'll see the wizard here is going to help us guide through what events you actually want to capture. So there's different types of events that you have here. We have list events. Here, let me hover over. Let me select that for a minute. And this is when a field has been added or a field's been removed. These are events that are at the list level. It's not when you're adding an item to a list. That type of event is a list item event. So when items are being added or deleted or checked in or checked out, it fires an event, and you can run your custom code at that point. There's other types of events, email events, because lists can be set up to receive emails, web events, and workflow events, and you can handle those different ones. The most common one I think you'll see is the list item event, so we'll go ahead and do that. We then need to pick an event source. So since we're working with the task list, that's the list that we want to fire this event off of. We'll pick the tasks list. And lastly, we can pick from all of these different events, and we actually have quite a few. You'll see that you have add did events or deleted events, and then you have ing, adding or deleting. The ing events are synchronous before events, and the reason for that is so you can run your code and potentially cancel the event, and that's exactly what we're going to do. The ed events, those are asynchronous events that are kind of fired and forget after the event has actually occurred in SharePoint. So you have kind of both sides of the event that you can handle. In this case, we're just going to go ahead and go with the item being deleted. Oops, and it's actually not the ed, I apologize, it's the being or has already been deleted. So we're going to pick that being deleted. We'll click Finish. Behind the scenes, our tools will generate the XML that's required to declare the event receiver. If you've done that manually, you know what I mean. All you need to do is come here to the code file and write whatever code you want, that custom user code that you want to handle that event. So in this case, we're going to check the status of the task, and if it's not equal to completed, then we'll go ahead and cancel the event. If it's equal to completed, we'll let it go through and the task will be deleted. So we'll do that with my 4 remaining lines of code that I'm allowed to type. So we'll go ahead and use, you can see we have a properties parameter that's passed in. There's a lot of goodies that are hanging off that properties parameter, so we'll go ahead and take advantage of that. And I might have to spell it correctly even. There we go. So if we look at the properties, we'll see that we basically want the item that is available to us that the event is firing off of. So there we go, list item, that's what we want. Now I will say, you notice I typed in IT because I thought it was item, it's actually list item. That's IntelliSense, really, that's the Intella in IntelliSense. Is it kind of knew what I wanted, I just had to get close. So we'll go ahead and choose list item. So along with being able to clap whenever you want, you can also laugh whenever you want. It's totally okay. I mean, I don't have to break into real jokes, but I will if I have to. So properties.listItem, that's going to give us the current item that this event was fired for. And just like when we were setting the values for fields on a list, we can also get the value of that. So we'll go ahead and use this, and we'll grab the status field. That's the field we're looking for. And we better close that or we won't be happy. So if the status value is not equal to completed, that's when we want to go ahead and cancel the event. And that's real easy to do. Oh, wow, who said that? You get the geek shirt. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. There we go. And we will go like such. And the way we're going to cancel that event, it's real easy. It's one line of code. We use our properties object again. You'll find that there's a cancel attribute, or property, and you go ahead and just set that to true, and that's going to cancel the event, and SharePoint won't delete the item. In addition, we'll be a friendly programmer and let the developer, or let the user know why we did that. So there's also an error message. We'll set the error message to task cannot be deleted. Typos don't count. All right, so we'll give the developer or the end user a little hint for why we couldn't do that. We'll go ahead and press F5. What's going to happen is if we need to retract the previous solution that was already deployed, that will be retracted. That happened really fast. Yep, that's not going to work. So we'll go ahead and retract the previous solution if we need to, and then we'll bundle up or package up the new solution. This time it has both the web part and the event receiver. And then we'll deploy and activate and do all the good stuff that we did before. Let's go ahead. Thank you very much. I wish I had something to give you. Swedish candy from the previous guy. So we'll go back to our test page, and we'll put in a test task. So let's go back to that go on vacation, because I shouldn't delete that until I actually do it. And we'll actually start that. I get back tomorrow, so let's just start that tomorrow. We'll add the task. You can see there by the confirmation, we've added the task there. We'll go over to our task list, and we'll notice here that the status is still not started. Oops. So we'll go ahead and we'll click that. We'll use our cool ribbon to delete that task. And yes, we really want to. And there we get the error message that we would expect, that the task can't be deleted. So super easy to create event receivers, super easy to create visual web parts. Those are two of the most common things that you'll find yourself doing in SharePoint development, especially up front. And then you'll get into more advanced things like workflows and such. We should probably confirm that logic's going to work both ways. So actually, let's set this to completed, gesundheit, and hit save. And then we'll delete that. And this time, we didn't do it right. Let's see, let's edit that again. I'm out of shirts, so you can't help me yet. So we did set that to completed. Uh-oh, we might have a bug in our code. That's not good. But if all went well and I wrote the code right, that would actually be deleted. There we go. Woo. I think we can all see that I'm not a great typist, huh? Wow, it's getting worse, it's getting worse. And boom, right? Yes. Let's press F5 and see if that's really going to work. Is it not going to work? And delete. Come on. All right, you're going to have to believe me that if I was a better typist, that we would get that. You know, I think you might be right. So we want to do properties.list item status to string not equal to completed. I spelled that right. So now we're being stubborn. We're going to try this. This is the last time we'll try it, though, because we're not here to test my coding skills, because we'd be in a lot of trouble if that was the case. Woo! Thank you. I wish I had a shirt. I have a bunch of candy I'd throw at you, but probably wouldn't want me to do that. All right. So I want to show you just a couple of the things in the primary tools that we have. I have mentioned workflow a couple times. Workflows are really great. Let me go ahead and add a workflow. We'll just show you the designer. I'm not going to actually build a workflow. Workflows are a little more complex. There is a great designer that makes them fairly easy to get started, but they're super powerful. So they're not something I want to go through today. It'd probably take a full session to describe how workflows work, even just in their basic form. But in general, workflows can be, again, hung off of a list or of a site. So if a certain document is added to a list, you can fire off a workflow. Maybe you need to get approval or send an email. You can also do things at the site level. Maybe when a user is added to the site, you want to trigger a site workflow to do certain processes. Our wizard helps you here. You can choose what type. You can also choose what list you want us to automatically associate the workflow to. You don't have to do this on F5. If you want to do this yourself, just go ahead and uncheck that box. And then after you press F5, you'll need to go associate the workflow to whatever list or site that you want to. But just to make the F5 experience better, we added this into the tools to help you out. And then lastly, you can choose when does this workflow kick off? When an item is created, when it's updated, or can the user manually also kick off the workflow? We'll go ahead and choose the defaults there. And here's the workflow designer that I talked about. And if you see over here in the toolbox, there's a whole bunch of basic or standard workflow activities that you can use. There's code activities and if-else activities. There's also a number of SharePoint-specific activities to create a task or to handle task change events and so on and so forth. So the way you use it is you basically just drag and drop things over. So if I want to just run some code outright, I can just drag this over and drop it there. I can do some configuration over here for some tasks. Other tasks, I just come in here and I write code to do whatever user code I want. So the workflow designer is pretty easy to use to get started and real powerful. We can have if-else blocks, and we can have while loops to kind of sit there and wait. So I can have a while loop that waits for, if I created a task up front, maybe I create a task here, and then I could go into this if-else, doesn't make a lot of sense, but I could go into my while loop, and I could wait for that task to change, and I could look again maybe at the status or % complete and take action and keep looping on that while loop until that task was completed. Workflows are really good for those long-running processes that you have that might run for minutes, days, hours, months, especially when there's human interaction that's required in that task or in that process. So where you might need to create that task that I talk about or call some external process and wait for that external process or that human to finish that task. And then the workflow picks up from where it left off and continues running down through the sequence here. So that's as far as we'll go with workflows. Again, they can get pretty complex. So we'll just stop there while we're ahead. The last thing I want to show in this demo is, actually I won't show it, I'll just talk about it. It's the BDC designer. So we have the BDC designer that you can drag and drop entities on. Those entities represent that external data, your line of business data, again, like an SAP database or a PeopleSoft or something like that. You can write code behind those entities to actually aggregate from multiple sources. So if you have some data in a database, but also have some data maybe in an OData or a REST service, you could actually bring those together using the code, and that could look like one entity. And then you could build an external list up in SharePoint to basically surface the data from that entity, and you get full CRUD. In 2007, you had read-only for the BCS. In 2010, yeah, go ahead, bring it out. Yeah, clap. It is a huge difference. I mean, going from read-only to full read, write, update, delete, I mean, it's night and day. You can even extend it and bring search into the picture for your external data by implementing your search method. So if you're interested in that, there's some great videos on Channel 9 from one of the other program managers on the team that shows you how to get started on the BDC models to bring in that external data. Let me see how we're doing time-wise. We're doing real well. Perfect. All right. We will give us all a break and switch back to PowerPoint just for a minute or two. Any big nagging questions so far? Is there something that's causing someone to say, what the heck am I doing here? Guy in the red. So there are also GUIDs. You could type in the GUID of the field. For the most part, yeah, you're going to be using that string. I will show you a little later that we have some help for you. We actually in the Server Explorer can show you all of the fields that are part of that. You know, I don't know that answer. We can look at that afterwards if you want to come up.
Excuse me, sir?
Yes.
Could you please repeat the questions because we cannot hear down here?
I will. Thank you very much. The question, the first question, and then I'm going to take one more, and then we'll move on. Was I put quotes for the field names. We put them as literals or as strings, and that is the typical way that you would do it. There is some help in the tools that can help you figure out what those names of those strings are or those fields. And then the second question, real quick, is. Absolutely. The question was, I'm doing C#, can you do this in VB? And yes, our templates are available, all of our templates are available in both languages. Great question. So back to our slides here. I have a couple here that we'll go through. The next thing I want to talk about is the project system. So you've seen me add artifacts and press F5 and everything just kind of gets packaged and deployed. We didn't have to do any XML, like I say, about the features and the packages. Our project system takes care of all of that. Our project system has some custom commands, so if you want to do a package or a retract of the solution that you're working on. There's specific properties at the project level, at the SharePoint artifact or the SharePoint item level, and I'll show you some of those. Even down at each individual file, there's custom properties that are SharePoint specific that our project system has exposed. Normally, and especially when you get started, you don't need to worry about that. But as you get more advanced in your SharePoint development, you'll want to tweak some of those things. So we want to do a lot for you automatically, but you always have control to tweak whatever you need whenever you get to that point in the development process. We have some special nodes in the Solution Explorer that handle the features and the packages, and I'll show you that in just a moment. We have this thing called map folders. I don't think we'll actually touch on it today. It's a little more advanced. And it's for farm solutions only, so we'll probably skip that today. But if you have questions about that afterwards, feel free to come up. All right. Our feature designer, I mentioned we have a feature designer. Features contain artifacts. So as you build up your SharePoint artifacts, visual web part, event receiver, those are the artifacts. You want to place those in features. And those features, in turn, go into the package. Each SharePoint project has a single package, but you can have as many features as you want, and you could put the artifacts into whatever features you want. SharePoint has some rules for certain types of artifacts can only go into certain features, and I'll show you a little bit of that. There's a thing called scope, and you have the farm scope, you have the web app scope, you have the site collection, and the web scope. That's kind of the hierarchy of SharePoint. And certain things can only go at certain hierarchy levels. Our packaging helps you with that. We'll do some validation for you based on our knowledge. And then we have a packaging explorer. It kind of shows you both the feature designer and the packaging designer in a hierarchical way. And we'll just go into the product and actually show you that. And I mentioned already, Server Explorer integration. We went ahead and put a new node in Server Explorer where you can add the site collections for all the sites that are on your local dev box, and then you can expand them and explore them and see exactly what's in each of those sites. And again, we'll just jump over to the product right now and look at exactly that. So let's take a look here. Let me clean up a few things here. You'll see we have 2 features. In fact, I mentioned you can have multiple features. Our project system, as you add artifacts, will actually create new features if there's not a feature that's compatible for this artifact. So if I look at the first feature that we had, I'll bring up the feature designer, you'll see that the visual web part on the right and the event receiver were put into this feature, but the workflow, it wasn't appropriate for it to fit into this feature, so we created a second one. And there's a number of different rules. It's not just the scope. There's some other rules also. And so what we did is we created a second feature and put the workflow in that. Now, as we create these features automatically for you, we, of course, put them into the package by default also, because we want you to be able to press F5 and have everything be deployed. You can customize that. If you didn't want, if I go to feature 1 and I don't want the event receiver, I can just move it over. So now when you press F5, we won't package that up. It won't be pushed up to SharePoint. You have all that control for yourself. We'll go ahead and put that back for now. So that's the feature designer. Real quick, there's this feature activation dependencies. I just want to mention that we have designer support for this. You can have one feature be dependent on another, and if you want to use that capability, you can just come down here, and I could point at an existing feature in this project, and we'll actually look across the entire solution if you have multiple projects. Or if it's an already existing feature that maybe has been deployed up to SharePoint, you can actually just come down and say it's kind of a custom dependency, and you have to go find the GUID, and you can use the Server Explorer to do that. Just plug in the GUID, and we'll do the dependency relationship for you. So it's kind of hiding down there, so I wanted to point it out. The one other much more advanced thing I want to point out is this manifest tab down here. Most of the stuff that you'll want to do in the designer, but if you really want to either see the XML that we're actually going to generate, so if you remember the hierarchy, you have artifacts, they go in features, and features go into the package. So each feature has to have an XML manifest, they call it, that describes what goes in this feature. And you can see that we're just pointing at the files that make up those artifacts. We're pointing at the visual web part has a couple files. The event receiver has a single file. There will come a time where you're going to want to edit this and inject some of your own custom manifest data. And you can do that by coming down here. And this isn't going to be valid SharePoint stuff, but you could insert a props with foo and do an end props. And what you'll see is when you type in valid XML, we'll actually merge that with our stuff automatically. That's super powerful when you get to the point where you need that. We will undo that because it probably wouldn't build, or at least it would give me a deployment error. So that's the manifest tab. It's a more advanced thing, but I want you to know it's there, so when you get to that point. The package designer, very similar. The package designer is going to show you which features are in the package. Remember that hierarchy we talked about? So here you can see we have the feature which contains the visual web part and the event receiver, and we have the second feature which contains the workflow. Again, you can move those back and forth. Same idea here. Here's the manifest. So you can see here the main purpose of the package manifest is to point at the features. So it's pointing at the features. In addition, the assemblies and what's called safe controls, those are also identified here in the package manifest. And you could use that edit option if you needed to. And in fact, notice here that we have just a single assembly, SharePoint 85, which is the output of this project. So we automatically know that we need to include that output. If I was to come to this advanced tab, at the package level, I can add another assembly. So if you have your own a third-party type assembly or your own library of assemblies for helper library or something, you could include that in your packages just by coming here and going and navigate to your DLL. My favorite DLL is this Twain DLL because it happens to be in the Windows root. So we'll go ahead and add that to our package. And what you'll see is we've automatically modified the manifest. And we can see here that we've brought that additional DLL, and we can put it in either the GAC or the bin. You can make that choice. Back here in the Advanced tab, when I added it, I could choose whether it was going into the GAC or the web app. Let's go ahead and delete that so we can stay out of trouble. So that's the feature designer and the package designer. Let me go ahead and quickly show you. Here's that package explorer that I mentioned. And this is actually going to give you a kind of a hierarchical view of both of the package here at the top level. And then you can see we have each feature. And underneath each feature, we have the artifacts. And in fact, we can blow that out even to another level and go like such and look at that. A lot of people don't know that you can actually drag and drop here. So if you want to drag this visual web part down here to this feature, you can actually do that from the Package Explorer. If it doesn't fit into that feature, we'll let you know that by not moving it. So you can also do a validation. You can come up here and you can say validate, and you can validate the entire package and get some error message for why maybe something doesn't fit. All right. So that is our packaging, and I wanted to also point out just a couple of special things on the project level. Here's a couple of those special commands I talked about, the package and the retract. If all you want to do is generate the WSP so you can hand it off to your IT admin, that's another common thing that needs to be done. You can just go here and click package, and then if you come down here to the output window, you will see that if I didn't have any errors, that's what I get for adding those things. This is giving me a bunch of errors on that workflow because I haven't set a bunch of required parameters. So we can solve that by deleting that workflow out of the project. And we'll delete the feature that also we put. We don't delete features automatically because we don't know if necessarily you want to get rid of it. So we'll add a new feature, but we won't delete it automatically on purpose. So now if I go and package that up, we should be able to go to the output window, and we can see that we created the WSP at this location. And if we went to that location, we'd find the WSP and the DLL and the PDB file associated with it. So that's what the package command does. The retract command, if you've deployed a solution up to your SharePoint site and you want to retract it, kind of remove it from your SharePoint site, you can click the retract command and we'll go up and we'll retract it. If you remember, I told you we automatically do that. When you hit F5, we actually look to see if there's a package up there with that name, and we'll automatically retract it for you if it's up there. I'm going to go here to the project properties and show you this SharePoint tab here. And the way that that's somewhat controlled is way down here at the bottom, we have this thing called auto retract. That's on by default, and when that's on, when you hit F5, we'll deploy your package. And when you stop debugging, we detect that stop debugging event, and we'll actually go and automatically retract that package as soon as you stop debugging. We'll actually then recycle, we'll recycle the web, and then we'll actually send a ping up, and we'll warm up the web. So the next time you hit F5, we'll be able to directly deploy, and we won't have to retract. And that really cuts down on the F5 time. So if you're hitting F5 every minute, you'll really appreciate the performance there. If you're doing Silverlight, maybe a Silverlight web part, there's a checkbox here that you can turn on the Silverlight debugger. By default, we hook up the JavaScript debugger to the browser, but you can switch that with this second checkbox up here. All righty. Excuse me. Let's go ahead and switch back to the deck here. Go through a couple more slides. Okay, so we've kind of talked about the tools. We went and we built out a couple real common artifacts. I've now walked you through fairly detailed, maybe a little overwhelming. Tried to keep it high level, but I wanted to point out some of the advanced features that I think you'll want to take advantage of, maybe a week or two into your development. So that's why I tried to at least mention them so you'll kind of know to go look for them is my hope. I now want to kind of switch over out of the core tools and talk about some of the integration that we have with Visual Studio and TFS and the whole ALM feature set. Here's a diagram of kind of the life of a SharePoint application. This could be true for any application, but for SharePoint, there's a few specific things. We have our development machine, like we talked about. It has Visual Studio installed, as well as SharePoint Server installed, or SharePoint Foundation. That could be either. And as we've seen, when I F5, we go and we deploy it, and we do our local testing. At some point, the developer is going to be happy with their 10 lines of code, and they're going to want to check it into source code control. If you're using TFS 2010, how many folks are using TFS 2010? Quite a few, excellent. We've got some great integration here, and some of the new test tools have some real great integration, as well as IntelliTrace and such. So we'll do the check-in into Team Foundation Server. And if you're using some of the more advanced features of TFS, or I don't know about advanced, but handy features, let's call them, you can set up nightly builds or continuous integration builds. And I'm going to do exactly that, because I think it's really key to show you how that works with a SharePoint, because there's a special little setting you need to set so that we don't only build the assemblies, but we actually create the WSP package. So you want to set up some sort of build automatically on the build server. There's a little configuration you have to do one time, and I'll touch on that a little bit. At some point, you then have a staging server, and if you were to create some custom PowerShell, you could actually automatically deploy that. We're working on a sample that we can provide so that we can actually give you that sample PowerShell, so that after the team build runs, it automatically deploys the WSP to your staging or your testing SharePoint site, so that when your warm-blooded testers come in, they can do their manual testing, or you could even kick off, as part of that PowerShell, you could even kick off some of your automated tests if you'd like. So then the testers come in, they do their testing, they close bugs, they probably find some new bugs. So then they use TFS to open those new bugs, and the developers come back in and they fix the new bugs, and the process continues round and round. So we'll touch on a few of these aspects, primarily the team build there, and I'll show you how to configure that. While we're talking about ALM, I would like to point out Service Pack 1 for Visual Studio 2010 was recently released. And with that, we had a couple of key things for SharePoint developers. We now enable IntelliTrace for SharePoint Farm Solutions, so you can use the great IntelliTrace. Is anybody out there using IntelliTrace? Have you used the new IntelliTrace feature? It's pretty cool. If you haven't used it and you have Visual Studio 2010, I believe you need Ultimate to use this feature. But if you hit an exception, or when you hit a breakpoint and you're stepping through your code inside of Visual Studio, you can actually, when you hit that breakpoint or that exception, you can actually walk back through your code and see a lot of the call stack and some of the method parameters that were back 20 lines ago. So you don't have to set a breakpoint higher up in your code and rerun your code. You can actually walk back through. It's like having a DVR for your debugger. It's pretty darn cool. That now works for SharePoint developers with the SP1 pack. The other thing that we enabled was unit tests. You can now do unit tests, unit tests, integration tests. We all call them different things. If you're heavy into the Agile, this will be an integration test. But a test that uses the SharePoint API. In the past, you haven't been able to do that with Visual Studio 2010 and SharePoint because there's a .NET Frameworks difference there. SharePoint 2010, as you probably know, is always using 3.5. Visual Studio 2010 came out and was using 4.0. So now with Service Pack 1, we've made these unit tests that take advantage or use SharePoint APIs. We actually can run those now. So it's available now. You can go up and download it. When you get the deck, that link will take you right to the downloader. I'd say definitely install Service Pack 1 and start leveraging these things. All right. Excuse me. And with that, we will jump back over and do another demo. So let's go ahead and clean this up a bit. We'll close that solution. What I'll do is I'll come over here to the Team Explorer tab. So we've been working mostly in the Solution Explorer, but now we're working on the TFS stuff. So I'm going to open up the TFS tab, or the Team Explorer tab. I've already connected to a team server. The way I did that was I just clicked here. I went and found the TFS Team Foundation server. In this case, I'm using the one that's local on my box. I like to do that in case network has issues. So I have TFS actually installed along with SharePoint and Visual Studio here. So I hook up to that TFS server. Now I can see my work items that I have. I've created a couple queries here. Here's my bugs that are currently open. So I have one bug where counts don't match. I also have another query for features. Here's a feature that says, implement the incident dashboard web part. Well, as you can see, I've actually done a fair amount of this work. Of the 6 hours of the original estimate, I only have 1 remaining, and I've completed 5. So let's go ahead and use our source code control, and we'll open up source code control, and here's that Contoso Insurance solution that I have remember I have that open task here. We'll close that out, keep it tidy. I'm going to double click on the solution, and it's going to bring it right out of source control and bring it right into my solution explorer here. So let's now go, and you'll see here's our web part. So I've started the web part, and I have an hour to basically fill in that image. So I'm thinking I can probably do that in an hour, even though I'm a program manager. That's within my realm. So let's go ahead and set that property. We'll do that. We'll just set the image URL. We actually have some enhancements here to what we call the image picker or the URL picker. And we go to some well-known server locations for SharePoint so that you can pick out of the images libraries. So I can just go here and I can pick that would be the completed image. Boom. So I've just set that image. What you may not have noticed is over here, you'll see that those two red checkbox, those indicate that we actually automatically went out to source code control and checked out those two files. I could have went and said right-click, check out, and then done the change, but I just went ahead and made the change directly. We did the checkout for you automatically. Those are the kind of integrations you would expect that you get with other types of languages. And so we want SharePoint to be that first-class citizen. All right, so we've made our change. Typically, I would hit F5 here, and we'd test it locally and make sure that it's all looking good and working right. In fact, let's do that. Let's press F5. Let's make sure we'll follow the path that we showed on the previous slides, if you remember. So I'm going to press F5. This is going to be deployed to my site. So here again, we're doing, in this case, I actually had deployed it previously, but I had not retracted. So you notice how that took a little longer? That's because I wasn't taking advantage of that auto retract. So I'm going to go to the site pages, and I think I already have, I have an incidents page that I thought I had configured. We'll go ahead and add that to it real quick. We'll edit the page, and we'll just insert that web part. In this case, I gave it a little better name. It's the Contoso Incident Dashboard. So we, as the dev, we've made our change. We've F5'd, and we're testing it locally, and it looks like it's good. We'll go ahead and save the page. And as you can see, I can click on this, and I get the new claims. Here's the 5 new claims. Here's the 2 agent-assigned claims. So everything looks good. I've done my local testing. So let's go ahead and close down the browser. We'll go ahead and close the solution, and we'll go ahead and check this into source code control. And actually, before we do that, what I'll do is I'll show you the build definitions. So this is where we get into those continuous integration builds or those nightly builds. I have a build, what's called a build definition that can be set up real easily. And I'll show you, I'll edit this. So we'll go ahead and edit this. And you'll see on the left, we have a few categories of areas. You get to give it a name and a description here. And here's a real key thing. It's the trigger. So how do you want to trigger this build? And remember, you can have multiple build definitions. It's not like you can only have one. So I can have one that's maybe set up like this, which is continuous integration. What that means is every time I do a check-in, it's going to kick off this build. I could just set it to manual and let the developers kick it off themselves if that's what they wanted. Or I could do what's called a rolling build. And basically that says accumulate changes up to this many minutes and then kick off a build. So that way if I have a big team and developers are checking in every 5 minutes, I don't have a build kicking off every 5 minutes. I don't know about you guys, but when we kick off builds, they can sometimes run for hours. So this is something you might want to take advantage of. You can also schedule a build to just occur at a certain date and time. And then lastly is this new option in TFS 2010 for gated check-ins. This is really cool. What it does is it allows the check-in to partially occur, but it doesn't get committed to the source control system until you've kicked off a build and the build is successful. And then at that point, the check-in is allowed to go into source control. If the build doesn't succeed, the check-in is basically rejected, and a shelf set is created, and the developer will need to go fix that bug before the check-in occurs. So that gated check-in, my developers would turn that on for me. They don't let me check in code anyway, so it doesn't really matter, actually. So we'll go ahead and set this back to continuous integration. Sorry about that. The other thing I want to point out is down here on the Process tab. This Process tab is where you go and you can select exactly what you want to build. In this case, we've chosen the entire solution. And if you notice, this solution actually has 2 projects. So when we build the solution, we'll actually generate 2 assemblies and 2 WSPs. And the way that we do create the WSPs is by setting this build argument right here. So you want to come down, you want to set the MS build argument to this value here. That tells our MS build step to not only build the assembly, but to generate or create the package, the WSP file. So that's real key. There was one other step that I had to do on this server one time, which was to bring over any SharePoint assemblies that I needed. And we have some scripts and we have a white paper that shows you how to do that. And I have a link to that in my references. So you go to the white paper, you run a script on your dev box, it zips up the required files. You take that zip file, you run the script on your build box one time, it puts the files down, and then you can set this flag and you can generate the WSP on your team builds. So that's really handy. So let's go ahead and save that. And now we will check in our code. We've made our change. We've tested it locally. Now it's time to go ahead and check our code into source control. And because we have continuous integration turned on, it will actually kick off a build automatically. So I want to show you that. So I'm going to bring up the builds. So here's the builds. So here's the files I'm going to check in. You can see those down below. I'll give it a comment, and that'll be finish dashboard. I can also, if you remember, I had that task which was assigned to me. I can also run any query. If I was fixing a bug, I could run my bug query, but in this case, it's a task. And I can go ahead and check that, and that task will be resolved for me. So I can link those together. I can link my check-in with the task. So if I want to look back someday and say, hey, why did I do that check-in? I can look at the task that was associated with it and maybe have a better idea of what that check-in was about. I can do other things here. I can have code reviews, security reviews. You can plug in whatever you want. We'll go ahead and hit the check-in button here. And what you'll see is after the check-in of the files, you'll see a build actually kick off automatically because of that continuous integration. There we go. It's running. Take about 30 seconds, I think. It took about 10 seconds. So you'll see that completed. We got the green checkbox. I can go in and I can look at the log and look at all the steps that process went through. Scroll down here. I can also go to the drop folder. As part of that build definition, I supplied a drop folder. I didn't show you that. If I was to bring that back up, you'll see here I specify a drop folder when the build is created. So from here I can just click and say open the drop folder, and you'll see that we have 2 WSPs that were created, one for each of our projects that are part of that solution. Alrighty. Didn't see no one's screaming there, so I'll assume that we're all doing well here. I have one more thing I'd like to demo for sure, and that would be the unit test. So before I move on to the unit test, any question around source code control, the team build, setting up of the build configuration? Any questions there? Looking good? All right. Let me just show you real quickly how easy it is to do unit testing now. So we'll close down some of this. And I'll bring up, I have a unit test project that's all ready to go. So this project, what we have here is we have a list definition. It has a list instance with it. So I basically have a list, a SharePoint list, and I have an event receiver associated with that list. And here is the event receiver. All it does is on the item adding event, we're going to set the value of the body to this string here, added by event receiver. So just something to fire off to show that we have an event receiver, so to update that body property. So what we need to do is we need to write a unit test to confirm that that's actually happening. So here I have a unit test that I wrote. And you'll see that it's, if folks do unit tests or integration tests, we adorn them with some attributes here to say this is a test class with one or more test methods. That's how the test tools know what the actual tests are. And then here's what our code's doing, is it's basically going out to getting the URL to my test site. Because remember, we're simulating this. We're not going to go up and click, click, click. We're going to use the SharePoint API to basically automate the adding of a task so that it will fire off the event receiver, which will update our body. And then after that happens, we'll do an assertion to make sure the code actually did what we expected it to do. So first we go ahead and we get a reference to our site collection, and then to the site underneath the site collection. and then to all of the list items for the test list, and then to all the items. And then we actually add one of those items, and we set the title and the expires property here, and then do the update. Very similar to what we did in the web part. We're just adding that, item to the list. When that happens, our event receiver is actually going to kick off, and that's really what we're testing here. The event receiver is going to kick off, update the body property, and then what we'll do is we'll go and get that first list item, and we'll assert that the body property is equal to that string. That's the same string that gets updated in the event receiver. So I've already deployed the list itself. It's up on my site. Let's actually go confirm since we did some. We'll go here, and yeah, so here's my test list. It has nothing in it. So if I just come back here and right-click and say Run Tests, it's going to run that test. If you look down here, you'll see that that test is going to, there we go, it's in progress, and it passed. It's a pretty simple test. So it passed that fast. We can see now we'll have an item here. So that item was created, and as we expected, the body has that property. And we were able to test all that with our unit test so that every time you make a change, you can just run all your unit tests and just confirm that you haven't broken other stuff and that your new code also is working as expected. Just to confirm, we'll go ahead and add something in here that makes it so it doesn't match, and I'll rerun that test. And you'll see there that it's going to fail. So just to show you there's no magic there. All right, so unit tests and IntelliTrace, those are new in SP1, so go install SP1. There's also a lot of other bug fixes in there, so I definitely would suggest if you're doing a lot of development with 2010, VS 2010, to get SP1. And with that, we will jump back to just a few more slides here. All right. So, kind of the last thing I want to talk about is extensibility. I don't expect folks in this room to go and create extensions on top of our SharePoint tools, but I want you to know that we put a lot of effort into making all of our tools very extensible so that some of the MVPs or whoever felt necessary, or ourselves in fact, when we put out our power tool, we actually use some of that extensibility. So people can extend our tools, they can create new project and item templates. That's a real easy thing to do. If there's not a project or item template that you'd like to see, it's not that hard to create your own. The community out there has created a bunch of extensions, so go take a look at those. I have a list of 2 or 3 of the community efforts. The Server Explorer is very extensible. And in fact, one of the biggest community effort out there with extensions is called CKS Dev. And if you go out to Codeplex, you'll find it, CKS Dev. And you can install it, and they install a whole bunch of extensions. They add a bunch more nodes to the Server Explorer. They also add context commands on a lot of those nodes to do actions against some of those artifacts. So you'll want to go out and check out those extensions. For those few people that are leaving early, please fill out a evaluation. I'd really appreciate it. And we're almost done here for the rest of you, so I promise not to keep you late. We have some other areas around deployment and packaging that are extensible. And here's that list of out in the wild. You have our power tools. So if you remember, I mentioned we released some power tools that give you the sandbox visual web part. I definitely would suggest getting that. We also give you better error messages when you build your sandbox web part. Now, with this extension that we released, if you try to use portions of the SharePoint API that are not supported in the sandbox, we'll actually give you red squiggles and errors right off the bat. You don't have to wait until deployment and runtime. There's a new Silverlight SharePoint web part. If you're doing a lot of Silverlight, there's a built-in Silverlight web part container that shipped with Visual Studio 2010, and then you can just build your Silverlight app, and the output of that is an XAP file, if anybody's doing Silverlight. And with this project that the Microsoft DPE team released, they make it a lot easier to build those Silverlight web parts. They wire up the different projects for you automatically. And then lastly is the MVP community folks, the CKS Dev. They just released version 2. In fact, I have a mail, I think a day or two ago, and they just released version 2 of their tools, and they do a great job. So you'll want to check those out also. And I also, Scott Hillier, who is an MVP, he just told me about another one that he did, and that was for a timer job. So if anybody's writing timer jobs, those are like batch jobs that run in SharePoint. Scott Hillier released an extension that you can download to create timer jobs real easily. It's a great template. So you'll want to check these out. Here's those additional resources that I mentioned. I know the links aren't here, and I apologize. If there's a certain link that really, you really want to know, you can come up and we can write it down. But there's some great areas. There's a team blog and a forum that I and a number of the other members of my team, the SharePoint team, as well as the user education team in SharePoint, all watch. And so go to the blogs and the forums to see what's going on or to ask questions. There's the development center, and then there's some other resources here that might really help you get started with SharePoint development. I want to point out oops, I actually might not have included the one I wanted. Yes, the bottom one, using TFS Team Build. That's the white paper I mentioned, so doing that one-time setup of your team build, that's the one you want to get. All right. There are some related content. I realize it's late in the week, so there's probably not a whole lot you can go to, but I wanted to mention a few in case they were recorded that I thought were appropriate. There's some hands-on labs that I think the hands-on labs are still open. And then you can follow me on Twitter if you want, MikeMorton_MSFT. I'll be honest, I don't tweet a lot, but I'm trying to get better at that. So as we're working on the vNext and stuff, I'll try to share some goodies with you at times. And that is what I have. I do want to ask you to please complete an evaluation. It helps me come back and make my bad jokes. But it's a lot of fun to come and share our tools with you and our products. So please fill out an evaluation, good or bad. Tell me how to be a better speaker. Tell me how good a speaker I am already, or somewhere in between. I really appreciate that. And we do have about 4 minutes. So if you have some questions, go ahead and go up to the mics, and we'll do that. And then afterwards, I can hang out here for a few minutes if you want more off-camera, casual questions. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.